Welcome, Cal. This is our discussions on the G7. Hopefully we can make some predictions that come through. The US, UK, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan will be meeting in Banff, plus the UE, to discuss world economic situation, most of it orchestrated by the US. What's your opinion on what's going to transpire at Banff?
Well, I think you can look to the past in order to try to figure out what's going to happen in the future. And I think if we look at the 2024 G7, which occurred in Italy, uh, you'll see that they came up with all kinds of wonderful ideas. One of them was they were coming up with a comprehensive deal outlined by the US government involving a three-stage approach that could lead to an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the release of all hostages, and a credible pathway towards peace under a two-state solution. The leaders also called for a significant sustainable increase in humanitarian assistance. We know how that worked out.
Yeah, it didn't work out very well for Gaza.
No, in fact, it's quite possible that because 7 of the backers of Israel came to the conclusion that there should be a two-state solution, that there should be a ceasefire, and there should be no starvation, it just increased Israel's commitment to speed up the process of depopulating Gaza.
Well,
So
I think that was aided and abetted by Trump's declaration that he wanted some beachfront property resorts for the wealthy.
well, that's that as well. But the thing is, it wasn't Trump at the last G7. So my point is that if we look at their past successes, for example, one of the glossies that they put out was, they were going to support women and girls, around the world. They were going to look into global warming, global strengthening global food system, health systems across Africa. So they had all of these wonderful announcements, and I don't think any of them came to pass. So quite likely, Canada's stab at the G7 coming up in Kananaskis is going to be less than fruitful.
Well, the finance ministers met in Banff earlier and nothing really came of that. My predictions are that the G7 will meet in Banff. I'm not sure if Trump will attend. My prediction is he won't attend because he's going to be facing 6 people against 1, and whatever UE nation leaders come as well. There's no room for a bully tactic, and I can't see Trump wanting to not be in a situation like when he dealt with South African president, what a schmozzle that was, or with the Ukrainian president, he wanted to really bully the situation. My prediction is that he imposed this 50% tariff claim against Europe in advance of the G7 meeting, because basically it is, a lot of European countries involved in it, and then he's going to walk in and say, oh, I'm going to reduce it to 10% tariffs. Look at how good I am. I cut a deal. Well, that's not going to fly. And that seems to be one of his tactics. Now, I don't know what your take is on what Trump's going to do at the G7. You got any ideas what he might be trying to pull for?
Well, you may recall the film footage from the NATO conference where Trump pushed his way to the front of the crowd and sat there, like I was going to say Charles de Gaulle or Napoleon, with his nose up in the air, elbowing his associates out of the way. So I can't see any changes here at all. The G7 is supposed to do things like expand outreach to emerging economies, adapting to the changing dynamics of international politics and economics. Well, that's really what's going to happen here. The G7 are going to be complaining to Trump about tariffs. So you have a choice. Trump can either be the jerk that he is and try to complain that the rest of the world is ripping them off, or it's like you say, he could say, okay, I'm going to reduce the 50% tariff on Europe down to 10%, and I'm a hero. and the Europeans walk away with a sigh of relief, and the economy is still screwed up. So it's going to be interesting. I like your earlier comment about whether or not they should even let him in the country because he's a convicted felon.
Well, and a sexual predator. I mean, there's lots of bears and sheep and mountain goats in the mountains. I'm not sure if they're safe with Trump coming to Banff.
Yeah.
A little humor, but the fact is, there's no humor in letting somebody like that into our country. We have laws. We are not lawless like the U.S. We do have laws that say felons aren't allowed in our country. Now, you're painted by the brush of the people you associate with. And when you associate with felons and you allow them into your country to discuss how they're going to declare war in your country, which Trump did, there's no difference between an economic war and a physical war other than the use of guns and instant killing and maiming of people, or the long protracted hurting of people by an economic war. That hurts people, especially poorer people. That can really impact their lives. So why would you want to associate your country with a felon? We are not the U.S. We are supposed to have laws, but we don't. We're a lot like the U.S. in that our laws now don't have any bite because we've allowed the deterioration of our legal system as well. So my thing is that Trump should never ever be allowed into Canada. The G6 would be better off as the G6, not the G7. They got rid of it being the G8 when Russia was part of the G8 and committed horrendous acts around the world, like invading Ukraine. They got rid of the G8. And now that the G7, U.S. has labeled itself as a rogue nation, committing crimes all over the world, or aiding and abetting, or turning a blind eye to crime, they should be expelled from the G7, and it should be the G6. And my rationale is very simple. Canada has been badmouthed over 100 times by Trump. Russia, what? Once? The allegiance that Trump has to Russia versus the allegiance to Canada shows the state of affairs, and we should not allow him in. Period. End of subject. My take on it.
Prior to this meeting, of course, they had the finance ministers meeting in Kananaskis. And for people who don't know, Kananaskis is towards Banff in southwestern Alberta, and it's fairly isolated in the mountains. They have a ski resort there, plus they have some beautiful golf courses. It's quite the tourist place. I'm sure there's a lot of people that aren't happy that the roads will all be blocked and the helicopters will be flying. The G7 finance ministers and central bank governors come out with phrases like working together, transcending national differences, and promoting global security. And you look at what's happened in the since January in the international monetary system and Trump's effect on the stock market. You look at that and you go, well, that's wishful thinking. How are you going to stabilize the economic system when you have a guy in power who changes his mind on an hourly basis and enriches his friends in more ways than one, telling his friends when to buy? It's a good time to buy. So people make millions for hosting a dinner for the top investors in his Bitcoin.
Yeah, that was around. They got some inside footage of that, where they're paying homage to get favors by buying Bitcoin. What type of free nation or democracy would ever allow that? That in and of itself should allow the other G6 nations to say, we don't need the U.S. anymore as part of this. We don't want to be tainted with the same brush as the U.S. Having Trump come to Canada and go to the G7 is, in essence, agreeing with Trump's declaration of war on Canada and allowing a felon to run havoc with the G6 when the G6 should stand on their own legs and say, no, we do not uphold those values. The American people might uphold those values. They stand for their president, but we in the free world do not hold those values. And I think it's time for the G6 to be the G6, not allow that felon across our borders. Look at the extra security costs and everything just to deal with them.
Well, the one of the issues facing the G7 obviously is that the first ministers meeting have to prepare the groundwork for the politicians to bless. And one of their statements is, we continue to call on the IMF to continue to enhance its analysis of imbalances in both its bilateral and multilateral surveillance. Now, Trump, of course, doesn't like the International Monetary Fund. We continue to engage with each other and international partners to advance international cooperation and deliver prosperity. Well, the only prosperity that Trump wants to deliver is to himself and pretend that it's for the benefit of the American people. So how they're ever going to turn the words of the finance ministers into a meaningful meeting, it's going to be a magic show. Like, what the first ministers are talking about is recognizing elevated uncertainty can have implications for the economy and for the financial stability. Well, guess who's causing all all the uncertainty?
Yeah, you're bringing the fox to the hen house.
Yeah, and these guys are they're trying to say, economic resilience and security. Well, the only person looking for economic resilience is Trump for his bitcoins, his hotels, his development plans in Syria and the Middle East and Saudi Arabia.
So my question is, do you feel that maybe the G6 is being going to be extorted for funds? Is that the premise of the meeting, that Trump shows up and says, hey, you're going to pay me money into my Bitcoin, which is untraceable, and I'll relax tariffs with you guys, and we'll start doing this, and that to benefit your countries and your political stances, or I'm going to increase the tariffs again and cause havoc to your economy. Is that a potential ploy by Trump at the G7 meeting in Banff?
Well, one thing that is noticeably lacking from the 25 points worked on at the finance ministers meeting, there is no mention of Gaza and the Palestinians anymore. They've fallen off the face of the earth as far as the first ministers of the G7 are concerned. And if you look at what's happening to the G7, and it perhaps has something to do with the relevance of what they say they want to do and what they actually do. BRICS, which is a competitive organization,
right,
now has exceeded, the countries in BRICS have exceeded the GDP of the US, Canada, Italy, France, Germany, and Britain. And who would have ever thought that could happen? Russia, India, Pakistan, China, all of a sudden what they say is becoming more and more important. And as Trump isolates them with sanctions and military actions, the G7 will become less and less relevant. So it should be interesting.
Do you see the U.S. under Trump wanting to join BRICS, because he has really shored up ties with many of these countries and has not imposed tariffs on countries per se, that like Russia and Israel and whoever else. He's shored up ties with these countries for a reason. Is it maybe to swing into the BRICS organization and drop dealing with Europe? I mean, he imposed 50% taxes on Europe for a reason. Is that possible reason that he's going to swing allegiances to Russia, and Russia is one of the founders of the BRICS, and start doing more business deals
You're
with
giving Trump
Putin.
you're giving Trump way too much credit. He doesn't have a financial plan. He has no idea what he's doing. The idiots that are advising him are worse than he
Well,
is
he's made
because.
$4 or $5 billion probably through his cryptocurrency.
But
So he
here's
knows what
here's
he's doing. He's getting wealthy when if he was in a country that enforced laws like Canada, he'd be sitting behind bar. Well, I can't say that in Canada. We let fraudsters go all the time. But if he was in the UK or Germany, he'd be sitting behind bars and he wouldn't have these billions of dollars.
and that's why I'm saying that his supporters are stupider than he is, because
Well,
be,
that's
because
obvious.
well, yeah, but the thing is, they're, for whatever reason, I think they believe that they will share in the profit that the elephant is generating as he trashes international trade and starts a whole bunch of criminal enterprises. But the thing is, they're not getting rich either, and now they're hoping for a big tax break. The billionaires that sit in his cabinet are all wringing their hands, hoping that they don't pay more taxes. They don't care about the price of eggs.
No,
They don't care about Medicare for people who can't afford it.
no.
They'll fly to Switzerland in their private jet and write it off if they need a specialized
Definitely an
Medicare.
economy of the wealthy in the US, and they're trying to project that same value to every other country in the world. And that's why Trump has no problem aligning with the oligarchs of Russia, is because he wants to make sure that his wealth is the ruling class of the world. And he's doing everything he can to make that happen. So why is he allowed to the G7, which is supposed to be uh, represented by democratic countries? The U.S. is not looking like a democratic country anymore. And my prediction is they may never have another election in the U.S. because uh, Trump has put everybody into power that can oversee an election and voting rigging. And he even said this is the last election you'll have when he ran. And I don't think that's a joke. And the passing of the ring will go to his sons or his relatives or whatever. The U.S. is on the verge of a serious situation possibly. And there seems to be no desire to act. I mean, if any president of the U.S. committed those crimes other than Trump, he would be impeached and sitting in jail. So why empower a felon? I
Well,
don't understand this.
well, if you look at the G7, I would compare it to a clown car. And you have the clown driving the car, and you've got these other six clowns hanging out the windows. And if they really wanted to do something of importance, the first thing they would do is stop the genocide in Gaza. That's the world's biggest crime ongoing right now. And
Exactly. And
and they're not applying any economic pressure. They're doing nothing. And so the clown car is careering down the highway at breakneck speed, and it's going to run into a wall. And
but
unfortunately,
we get painted with the same brush as the leader of the clown car. And that's my point, is why would the G6 go along with that?
no, because they can't get out of the clown car. Like they're along for the ride, and it's like the access of the willing, or whatever else they call their little club when they decide to go beat somebody up. They all get together and they follow the leader, and the leader, unfortunately, is a lunatic. He's a psychopath.
Yeah, can't disagree there. And what's going to happen at this six or and the clown meeting? I mean, is Trump going to start lying and every word out of his mouth being a lie and come up with some propaganda as to why he wants Russia back in and form the G8? Is Trump going to pressure the G6 to allow the U.S. to stay in and then bring his buddy Putin into the G8? So they have the only counter to BRICS is the G7 or G6. And now they want to make it the G8 so that he can do some fantastic business deals to enrich himself.
No, but here's the thing. Every time you have an exclusive club, you have a lot of excluded potential parties, right?
Yeah.
And these people obviously they either want a seat at the table or they're going to create their own table, their own little group. That's not healthy. You know that's not a health. That's not healthy for the
That's
world
why
economy.
BRICS was set up, was to do that originally, I believe, and also set up another world currency trade, because the U.S. greenback was the international dollar of trade, and a lot of countries didn't like that.
I my guess is that when they finish their meeting, they're going to show this ass kissing finale where they're all standing around smiling and clapping for Trump while the emperor has no clothes, and they won't mention the
That's a vision I don't want to see.
they won't mention the important things, like all the killing in the world and all the guns and bombs and stuff that they're selling, and how they want the world to increase their military spending. None of that.
Well, they want to deal with China being one of Trump's targets. They want unfair trading practices in China dealt with. They want, product dumping from Temu and Shein to be dealt with on the G7 level. I mean, I would love it if they would actually deal with it, but I don't think they're going to. It's what I coin as garbage economy that the G7 has bought into, where they're allowing cheaper products to be manufactured in other countries that have cheap labor, and they're filling our landfills, and they're filling the oceans with plastics and garbage. I mean, we do need the G7 to grab some agenda where, recycling becomes a priority instead of filling our landfills and dumping into the oceans. That would be a great topic for the G7 to deal with.
But those were all past topics. They talked about climate change. They talked about leveling the playing field for the South. They've talked about all of that over and over and over again. It isn't going to happen, and now they're not even talking about global warming anymore. I mean, Trump has turned the world upside down and shaken out the pockets of all his trading partners. So how they're gonna smooth this over will be interesting. And I bet you
quiet quitting, like, can we quietly quit dealing with the U.S.? I think Canada's going to quiet quit. I mean, Europe is quiet quitting. I mean, are you going to kiss the ring and appease his ego and then quietly quit? I hope that's the game plan, but I'm not sure.
Well, quietly quitting would be building a pipeline so that we had other customers for the oil. That would be a start.
The National Energy Program resurrected. The U.S. opposed it back in '80. They're going to oppose it and fight it.
Well, we got a new problem. We have the Premier of Alberta that thinks she would be better off as the 51st state, and as a result of that, you have a termite in the foundation, and it sounds tempting
Smith
to
walked across the floor in the Conservative Party back in the day. She has no allegiance to anything. She will walk across the floor and sell us out in a heartbeat. There's no doubt. All that has to be thrown on the table is something she wants, money or power. She's stated, if she becomes the governor of Alberta and they become part of the U.S., she would sell us out in a heartbeat.
Yeah, she'd get to shoot her dog with her own rifle because it disobeyed her and nobody would care,
Yeah.
like Kristi Noem, Yeah.
Well, Canada's got some real issues. I mean, by siding with Trump coming to the G7, I mean, Smith's probably sitting there telling Carney, you let him come into my country or else,
Well, realistically, Carney can't stop him and would not disinvite him. Like that,
Yeah.
he just realistically can't do that. I mean, it's nice in theory to think that, you could stop the, president of the most powerful country in the world to come and sit in the organization that they operate. It's not going to happen. And they would just change the location of the operation if Canada even suggested that, and we'd have 50% tariffs tomorrow. Maybe even the
Well, that's still
military.
better. It's still better than turning a blind eye and joining the parade of a felon and sexual predator, because you are painted by the clowns you hang with. And, what are we going to do? Put a big red nose on all of us and big shoes and walk around Canada? We're the clowns for the U.S.
And the
like
mega crowd, would love it. They were falling in line, right? They'd love it. So there, you can't, the only points you can make in an ethical statement is with ethical people. The Americans right now aren't behaving ethically. So it wouldn't hurt. In fact, Trump would love it if we told him he couldn't come.
I
He'd
guess
love
you
it.
got a point. I mean, you got to look at both sides of the coin. If we isolated the clown, he'd jump around and scream and holler and impose his will on us, which he's going to anyway. It's kiss the ring or get it in the backside. So,
Cory, he would take the car, the clown car with him. If you didn't let him come in, there'd be no clown car, and there'd be no G7. So that's an
well, G6
impossible.
is still a very influential group of countries, and maybe it's time the G6 set up their own organization.
Well, I think, why are we invited? We're like, Canada's economy is substantially less than California's. So, maybe California should have our seat instead of Canada.
There you go. Or California join Canada to give us more credibility. I don't know. Wishful thinking, but
We should get Florida because they got better hockey teams. Which reminds me, that game's on that game's coming on soon. So
okay, well, we should probably cut this short, and there's lots of
ducking
topics.
out.
I'm sure we'll be discussing the G7 again as it starts to get closer and closer. Thank you for your time, and share, like, and comment below, and give us your thoughts on G6 versus G6 plus one felon.
Bye.
You. Okay, bye.
Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and please share the video. Don't be afraid to share this commercial with your friends too.